Gambling addiction can impact anyone, anytime. But military service members and veterans are about twice as likely to develop this addiction. Fall In, a veteran with a gambling addiction, tells my personal story of struggle with gambling addiction and the help and hope I found that saved me. I share this story to raise awareness about the very real dangers of gambling addiction and to send a message of hope because gambling addiction is treatable and there are people who can understand what you're going through. Fall In is available in paperback and ebook at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And now it's available in audiobook format on Audible, Amazon Music, and Apple Music. This is the Fallen Podcast. My name is Dave. I am an 11-year veteran of the United States Army and gratefully in recovery for gambling addiction since January of 2020. What an honor and a privilege today in this space for those of us who struggled with gambling addiction. Honestly, it's hard enough to get people to, number one, recognize it as an addiction, and then number two, to get the support and the resources and the help that we need. Take that and try to do it as a woman, and all of those things become magnified. You know, when I walk into self-help meetings, anywhere I go, it's predominantly male-driven. A lot of the self-help groups I go to are male-driven. It seems the conversations around gambling addiction center around men, but there are many, many women out there who are struggling with gambling harm. Enter Christina Cook, who a few years ago, not only through her own journey, which she's going to talk about, but recognized that need. And from that came the Broke Girl Society, which started off as a podcast and has become so much more. And Christina, let me just say hi and thank you so much for being here.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I mean, I always love to collaborate, so I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, and I'm grateful to have you here. I mean, Christina and I often talk, but this is the first time I've actually had you on here, and I'm so glad that we're doing this because I think your voice needs to be heard everywhere. You know, pretty much even in the circles that I'm trying to reach in the military and veteran community, your voice needs to be heard. It's important. I want to start with this. Tell us about you. Tell us where you come from, who you are, and then we're going to get into your journey. If that's okay, I'm just going to have you talk about your journey and what brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. So I am from Oklahoma, and just to give you a background of the landscape of gambling in Oklahoma, we only have on-site gambling casinos. They're tribal casinos, but we have the most casinos in the US. In the state, we have one of the largest gambling floors. And so, like, just in a 30-minute drive of me, I can be to 8 different casinos. And these are 30 to 45 minute. We'll give a little more time, but these are huge Vegas style casinos. It's just interesting. You drive down the streets and there's like exit here for this casino, exit here for this casino. And though it's not like some states where it's in every deli, on every corner, every gas station, it's still a huge issue in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is kind of has some of the highest problem gambling rates in the US as a
Yeah.
whole. And so that's just kind of the general background of Oklahoma. But gambling didn't come into Oklahoma until the early 2000s. I think prior to that, we had some bingo halls and we had some racetracks, like just a handful, not anywhere what it is today. And so gambling wasn't something I was really introduced to. It wasn't something that was in our communities. It wasn't something I remember mom going to bingo nights occasionally, coming back a little bit sauced, just kind of like girls' nights things. So to me, that was just kind of my introduction to it. Anything I really knew about gambling, I knew from like movies or TV. So I didn't really know that gambling could be impactful. And I certainly didn't know there was an addiction around it. Kind of fast forward, my life was just kind of, I looked at it and it felt like, growing up, my life was normal. I think a lot of us can probably be like, that was our normal, right? But I was raised by a single mom and things were really, really tight. And, she struggled with some mental health, depression and some things like that. And my oldest sister was diagnosed around 13 with schizophrenia. So this is just to kind of give you a little bit of a view into the window of kind of my childhood. It was stressful, chaotic, resources were really limited. I don't remember really going hungry or going without a roof over my head, but other than that, emotional support, things like that were just very limited. I think that's
Right.
probably a lot of people could say that today, just growing up. For me, I got married really young, just right out of high school, pretty young at 19. But then, after years and lots of stuff that went on in that, we were definitely got married too young. I found myself divorced at 28. No kids. I'd gone through some infertility struggles and things like that. And so it's like 28, no kids, single, gambling had kind of started to pop up into um, our communities. Casinos were going up, and it
Okay.
just seemed like a safe thing to do. And so I just found I wasn't really connecting with like my friend groups. They were all getting married, having babies. I felt really disconnected from that. And so I found myself kind of going up to the casino on Friday night. It was well lit, seemed safe. It's all in hindsight.
Yeah, and probably a feeling of social connection too, right? I mean, that's at least that was my experience at first.
Yeah, definitely, and it was a different kind of social connection because I'm introvert. Like I'm not a real like get out there and party kind of girl, so I wasn't really for the bars or anything like that. But yeah, you get out of the house, you can have a little bit of connection, but also kind of you can be around people, but also in your own world, which is what I liked
Yeah.
about slot machines. That was what I played. That's the only thing I played. I didn't play table games or anything like that. And I had some family that went with me. My mom went with me. Definitely social interactions.
Gambling addiction is no small fight, even and especially for those who've served. Fortunately, Kindbridge Research Institute is digging deep to understand it. They're finding answers and building better support for military service members and veterans. Curious? Go to Kindbridge Research Institute, KINDBRIDGE Institute.org to learn more about their ongoing programs and initiatives. Did this kind of socially or casually go on for a long time? When did it start to change? I guess is probably the best way to ask that question.
Yeah, so kind of going back to like I found myself divorced at like 28 and just kind of I think even like how I kind of explained my childhood even in the simplest way there. It's like there was this pattern of kind of avoidance of issues and things like that. And when I found myself divorced, I never really sought treatment or help to help me navigate those emotions. Even with all the stuff I went through as far as like trying to have kids and those types of things, I never really looked at getting support to help me through some of these really hard emotions. Instead, I just kept kind of avoiding it and finding the next thing that was going to make me feel better. And gambling kind of started to become that for me. I could go up there, I could kind of forget about my problems, so I started to really use that as a coping mechanism. And for the first few years, it was fine. It was normal. I was paying my bills, I was doing the normal stuff, I was gambling occasionally. But then it's like it starts to progress. This life starts to kind of throw things at me that I still don't have the tools to process because I'm just avoiding life instead of living it. So I found myself in a relationship that was really hard for me to define as far as like this relationship. I'm kind of struggling with words now, but there was a lot that happened in this relationship. It was an extremely abusive relationship. There wasn't a physical abuse, so it was really hard to find. And I just have to say, I remember telling this story one time on another podcast, and one of the comments, and I never read the comments because like sometimes people can just be really mean.
Yeah.
And I just remember I was looking at the comments because somebody sent me a comment and I wanted to reply to this particular comment because it was a really sweet comment. And underneath it was this one that said about the abuse, saying, "That's not abuse. That's just a toxic relationship." I remember seeing that comment being like, "What?" Like, I'm glad that you were in it and you could tell me that. You know what I mean? But it was just kind of, I just remember thinking that one time. And it did kind of make me question myself of like, even then reading that comment, I was just like, was it abuse? You know what I mean? But then it's like going back and after therapy and stuff like that, it absolutely was abuse. It was verbal, it was
Yeah, for
mental, it
sure.
was
For
build me
sure.
up, break me down, build me up,
Yeah.
break me down. It was controlling every aspect of my life. I ended up going to work with this person, going to work for him, and it ended up like controlling every aspect of my life. And so I felt so out of control in my life, but for some reason, gambling helped me feel more control in my life, if that makes any sense at all. And maybe to somebody who's been there, it does.
It makes a ton of sense, believe me.
And so it's like, hindsight is like I had no control there either, but there was just this illusion of control. Like I could go
Right.
there and just be myself and be with myself and not have all these outside thoughts of like, you're not good enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right. Instead, I was just sitting in a machine that all it wanted from me was money. It didn't want to judge me. It didn't want to, you know, give me opinions or anything like that. And so that became a good friendship to me, this
Yeah.
machine. Yeah, I started finding myself going more often, especially as that relationship kind of got out of control. And I just didn't know how to stand up for myself in that relationship. I don't
Right.
think I ever
Right.
learned how to stand up for myself, period, at that point. It was
Okay.
just like
Okay.
I made myself invisible, quiet, didn't want to disrupt. And a lot of that is from just the behaviors I learned as a child in kind of a chaotic house.
Mhm.
Like you just learn to be invisible. You just learn to kind of not make waves. And so, fast forward, I'm going through all this and in this relationship where I'm just trying not to make waves and like there's so much control there. I don't know how to get myself out of the relationship and all these things. And so yeah, gambling became just a big part of my life and how I started to deal with life.
Yeah, and I want to stop there just for a second if I can to kind of I'm going to backtrack just a hair and tie that into what you just said. One of the things you just said, and for anybody who's not struggled with this addiction, anybody who has will understand perfectly what you said. But for some people who may be learning about it, you said the machines didn't expect anything from you, right? They just allowed you to be there. They just allowed you to disconnect, to detach. It felt like being you just for a minute, and the outside world was not bombarding you for a while. When you grow up in a way where you learn to detach yourself from other people because of trauma, because of abuse, because of emotional detachment, whatever it is, that can feel really good. It almost feels like a surrogacy, doesn't it? In that expectation, it's not even as much the excitement of the win or the expected win, although that's a big part of it, right? But it's just the feeling of, oh, you don't want anything from me. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, I would walk in and it's like the whole world would just kind of black out or fade away.
Yeah.
Like I'd walk in and it'd be like, okay, you know what I mean? Now I can go do what I want to do and not have somebody. It's like it even got to the point where I didn't want to bring people with me.
Yeah.
Like because I didn't want somebody else dictating what I was doing in there. And I think that that's
Right.
a very common thread among people as the progression of the disease, disorder, whatever, however somebody identifies. Like you start to kind of like take all these elements and keep it just for you. Like this is just for me. I don't want, because when I first started going, I would go with friends, family, whatever, and it was fun. But as it started to kind of take hold and I started to build this relationship with it, I wanted it to be just my relationship. Like I didn't
Yeah.
want to include other people into it. I didn't want other people to impact that relationship. And what that could look like is somebody borrowing my playing money. Like they're out of money and they're like, hey, spot me $20 or whatever. I'll be like, no, because it's $20 I need to keep feeding
Yeah.
my machine. And so all those kind of little things, it's all hindsight. You look back at it and you're like, oh, the casino felt safe. Really, it was the biggest monster of them all to me. To me personally, like it ended up being, the worst thing for me. But at the
Right.
time, it really felt like what my safe space. And as I
Mhm.
continued to build this relationship with the casino and gambling,
So that began to progress, I'm guessing, and I guess kind of pick it up from there and tell us kind of where we went from there, where you went from there.
yeah. So I gambled for about 15 years altogether, from start to finish. So at the start, that's where it was a few years. It was good, fine, doing it how I should. Then a couple of years is when you start to kind of see the issues. You start to talk yourself out of the issues. You start to kind of turn a blind eye to some of the issues. But it was probably right about 5, 6, 7 years in. I can't really pinpoint it, but something just tippled over. You know what I mean? Where it was causing issues, but I was always able to kind of work myself out of those issues or fix the issues or whatever. Then it kind of just toppled over to being progressively worse. Like I would spend way more money. I started spending my paychecks. I started spending everything, maxing out my credit cards, borrowing money. I started to get into that cycle. And I think anybody who struggled with gambling knows what that cycle is. You borrow, borrow, borrow with the intention of like, oh, I'm going to hit it big and be able to pay all this off. All those delusions and things that I say delusions. I don't know if that's a nice word, but For me, that's exactly what it was. I was
I think it's a
just,
fair word.
yeah, rational, irrational, however anybody wants to identify. But for me, it was like I kept having these scenarios in my head of like, this is all going to work out. Yeah, I'll take out a title loan on my paid off car because that makes sense, right? So I would go in, and here's the thing, and I don't know if anybody's going to relate to this, but I started getting like rushes out of like going and borrowing money and being like, yes, I got money. Like that would give me a really big rush. Like I would, even if it was like a check cashing place or someplace like that. And
Right.
I would be like so nervous to go in there. And even the whole way there, I'd be like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is so not what I want. And like, oh, this is like not cool. And then I would go through the process and they would hand me the cash and I would get like this rush or this high. And I was like, yes, yes, now I can go gamble again. And then I would go gamble it all and it would be gone in like an
Yeah.
hour. And I just went through all that stress to try and get this money because I needed it because I'd spent everything I had and I had stuff due. But I found I kind of now looking back at that, like I got a rush out of borrowing money or getting my hands on money so that I could go gamble. That became almost as big of a high as the gambling was for me. And that was probably more on the point of like when the gambling stopped feeling as good,
Mhm.
like borrowing the money started to kind of bump that high up a little bit. You know, so I started just that cycle of tremendous debt and lies of like, how can I get more money?
Right.
And like, who have I not lied to get money? And how do I keep up with these lies so that when I borrow again, like they're going to be like, well, what happened to this? And I'll be like, oh, you know, got to figure that out. So it ended up being like a pretty rough, unimaginable cycle that most of us can't imagine.
And now, all during this time, you're still in that toxic relationship that's definitely not helping anything. Yeah.
No, I think most of my the worst years of my gambling, I was in that relationship, and then I finally
Okay.
was able to kind of some things changed work wise, and I was able to kind of pull myself out of it, got out of that relationship, but I was still working for him. Like relationship wise, I think it finally got to the point where he actually ended things. It just kind of started to fizzle out.
Okay.
And so, but we decided to continue working together because we were both good at what we did for that company. So he still kind of had his claws in me, but I had some freedom. During all this time, I've got a major gambling problem, struggling in a lot of areas of my life, and I'm still not seeking help, still not understanding
Mhm.
that I'm using my gambling as a coping technique. And so I start dating again, and I meet somebody, and you know, he's the opposite of that abusive relationship. He's kind and nice. But what I kind of found myself doing is like thinking a relationship was going to fix all my other issues, right? Thinking
Okay.
somebody else was going to help me fix my issues. And so as I progressed with this relationship, still carrying all this weight and all this trauma and all these things with me, not really recognizing that he has his own issues. Like and I don't want to share his story because that's his story, but he had his own addiction to alcohol and he wasn't recognizing it. He wasn't ready to see it, but that addiction enabled my addiction. And so we ended up in this, like, in a relationship that we shouldn't have been in. Neither one of us should have
Okay.
been in, but we ended up
Right.
getting married and you know, ended up in this unhealthy kind of dynamic again, even though he wasn't mean to me and he wasn't physically hurting me or mentally hurting me. It was just we weren't healthy. Like we were both enabling each other's addictions and that caused its own kind of dysfunction. We weren't talking healthy,
Right.
all of these things. On top of that, my gambling addiction just really continued to progressively get worse until around 2018 was probably the worst year of my gambling. I had been put on some medication because I was so depressed and I kept addressing all these things that could be wrong, like my weight, my mental health, all these things, but I was never addressing the gambling addiction. I never told my therapist I was struggling with gambling. And so she just medicated me and put me on a Fexer. And to say that that medication completely numbed me, like, is just an
Wow.
understatement. I had no feelings about anything, like everything. I had no anxiety. I didn't care about life. And that same year, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer as well. And so I was on this medication. I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. I was like so bogged down with my emotions that I didn't even address that, I think, in the way that I should have. I hadn't had children by this time, even though I was married and we were talking about it. I
Mhm,
still hadn't had my own children. I guess I always thought that I would have my own
mhm.
children, but here I am in my late 30s. You know, now I'm faced with this scenario where I'm not going to be able to, because
Right.
even though I went to two different doctors, they both said the same prognosis, like you have to have a full hysterectomy.
Okay.
Um, and that was the treatment plan. And then hopefully, you know, there was this big plan, but until I had the surgery, they weren't going to be able to figure out exactly what I needed. Turns
Mhm.
out I went through the surgery. Everything came back really good. And so my treatment was very limited. I never really just addressed those major emotions. You know, like here I am, a woman who doesn't have her own children, who always thought she was going to be a mother. And I know that there's so many ways to be a mom nowadays. But back then, like back in 2000, I mean, I was just struggling in every capacity. And
Okay.
I wasn't addressing the situation properly.
So a lot of band-aids, but no real treatment.
Exactly, but a lot of
Yeah.
pain and a lot of I just kept carrying it, carrying it, carrying it, but also
Yeah.
avoiding it, avoiding it, avoiding it. And so that was probably the worst year that
Okay.
my gambling, like financially, took a toll. I ended up getting a car repossessed that my sister had co-signed, and
Mm.
she had really good financial health. And this is something we had done back and forth for each other. She trusted me, and I, you know, trusted her, but you know, I messed up and I got behind on the payments. And instead of coming clean to her, I lied and lied until finally the car got taken. And when I called her about it, she was just like, just stop. I called the bank directly. Like I had fed her so many lies about it.
Right.
She called the bank directly and the bank told her and they gave her a pretty good deal to kind of clean it up and fix it and get the car back. And my sister said, no, no, I'm just going to let it go and I'll take the hit on my credit. And that was really one of the hardest moments in my life.
Wow.
Harder than the hysterectomy. Like that moment really stuck with me because that was the point to me where it wasn't just hurting myself.
Yeah.
Like it really hurt. Like I that was the moment that I like recognized
Okay.
how much I impacted somebody else. And then it was just kind of opened my eyes to kind of how I was impacting everybody around me. And I think that's when kind of the really hard feelings started, like thoughts and feelings started for me, but it was still 4 more years before I really even acknowledged that gambling was an issue
Mhm.
for me. I mean, I started to see the impacts, but I thought it was just, I didn't think it was about the gambling. I thought it was just, I'm just this person that can't do anything right because that was kind of what was had been put in me. And
Yeah.
um, I'm just bad with money. And it was never the gambling, right? It was always coming back to just me and all my mistakes and everything I was doing wrong. Yes, there's truth to that, right? Of course, you know, looking back and taking accountability now, but I never really was addressing the big elephant in the room.
Yeah, and I guess that's my question. Looking back and thinking back to it, saying that it is, me as a person, it's the things that I'm doing, and not really addressing the gambling portion of that. Is that a lack of understanding of the power of the addiction, or is that denial of the fact that the addiction is having that big of an impact on you, do you think, when you look back on it? Now obviously you see it differently, but back then, did you know at some level that the addiction needed to be addressed in order to start addressing some of these other things?
No, I can honestly say I never looked at it as an addiction. I didn't
Okay.
know. I didn't
Yeah.
know that something that was supposed to be entertaining could be an addiction. I didn't grow up around addiction. I grew up around depression and mental health
Mhm.
issues, but I didn't grow up around addiction. The only thing I really knew about addiction was just what was taught in schools, you know, the DARE program, those types of things. I
Right.
didn't know because where I grew up with gambling being relatively new to our state, it wasn't something that we focused on. I don't even think they focus on it now, to be honest. But it wasn't something I really honestly thought I was just messed up. And though I take accountability for, yeah, I was messed up. But I was also struggling with an addiction and had been
Yeah.
for a really long time. And I just didn't know it or know how to recognize it, didn't know the signs. And yeah, you see the little number when you walk into the casino. I never once thought about that number. It was so little on the
Right.
door when I walked in, and I was walking in. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, maybe I should call and not walk in. You know what I mean? Like, I'd
Yeah.
already, that makes no sense to me. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, put it on the
Well,
door so they see it when you walk in.
yeah, and the part of that too is, it says gambling problem. Well, how do I know? And I'm gonna kind of back up what you're saying, and I talk about this often as well, is the fact that there was a time when I thought nobody could ever understand the crazy thoughts that are going on in my head. I didn't understand those crazy thoughts. So I hear exactly what you're saying. For a lot of us still today, don't even realize that this is an addiction and that it's treatable. We just think, oh, something's just out of whack here.
Well, like, I'm sure you can attest to this, right? Like, I'm the only one that just can't do this right. Like, I'm the only one that
Yeah.
can't gamble right. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
and I don't know how many times, like, at this point, I've probably talked to thousands of women at some point in their recovery. And I
Mhm.
hear that, and so many of them say, I thought I was the only one. And I'm like, but when you really think about it, and I know it's a lot harder for those who gamble on their phones or wherever, but when you are a casino gambler, which a lot of women still are, I keep
Mhm.
hearing the assumption that women are now gambling on their phones, and I'm like, no, there is just as many still gambling in those. The brick and mortar casinos aren't going anywhere, and they are just as full as they have ever been, even more
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I know phones are making it even that much more accessible. But when I would sit in that casino and I would just look around, I was surrounded by women. The same women I would see each time I was there. Like, I could pinpoint the same women each time. And so it's like, I know I wasn't alone. Why did
Right.
I feel so alone? Why do all of us women, like, why do we say that? I felt so alone because we weren't talking about it. It's the silent addiction. We weren't saying, hey, I'm struggling with gambling. And it even became a really big joke with my friends of like, oh, Christina's off running errands, because that's how I isolated myself. I'm like, oh, I can't hang out, guys. I gotta go run some errands. And that just became the big joke because it was always errands. And then, yeah, and then exactly. And then friends would come by and they'd be like, hey, so and so said they saw you at the casino the other day. I thought you were gonna come hang out with us. And I'm like, and it was just like, oh, I'd be devastated if when somebody would say that to me. I was just like, thinking of excuse of how I ended up at the casino. But I think
Yeah.
in hindsight now, it's like they all kind of knew, but nobody ever asked me like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I don't want to put that on anybody, but if you're somebody listening to this now and you think you notice isolation in your friends or whatever, just give them a quick call and be like, "Hey, is everything okay?" Because I think that might have started some conversations.
Well, you would have had a chance to react a different way, and that's one thing. And this is why you do it. I'm sure this is part of why you do what you do, and I know it's part of why I do what I do, is to make people aware of the fact that those of us that have struggled with this in addiction, oftentimes we live in isolation. Like extreme isolation. And you're absolutely right. If somebody had come up to me and said, "Hey, I noticed you're kind of staying away from everybody. Everything okay with you?" They wouldn't have to say to me, "Why are you gambling so much?" or "Do you have a problem?" All they would have had to say was, "Is everything okay?" And at least you would have had the opportunity to answer in a different way, right? When nobody says anything, then it feels even more isolating, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's hard too because it's hard for you to say out loud that you're struggling with something anyway. And we're doing maybes here because I don't know. I honestly don't know. I get asked this a lot, like what would have been different if an employee of a casino came up to you, and we'll get into that because I have a story. It's hard to say, but nobody ever asked me like, "Are you okay? Are you doing okay?" They just let me kind of disappear from their lives, and I always kind of wonder about that, and I get that everybody gets busy with their lives and things like that, but it has made an impact in how I connect with the people around me. It's like I'm not going
Right.
to let anybody disappear from my life. Like, I've got such a tight knit group of people in my life now that it's just really important to me to stay connected, but it's also a lot of the work that I do, right? It's just checking in and making sure everybody's okay. Let's kind of fast forward, kind of get this little part of it summed up, is when I actually kind of stopped the gambling. So I said I gambled about 15 years. And so the last part, that 7 years, the last part, it was just the worst. I mean, I broke myself financially, spiritually, mentally, and physically. I was dealing with a lot of physical symptoms. I'd gone through the surgery to uh, get rid of the cancer. I had been diagnosed with diabetes this time because I wasn't like physically taking care of myself. I'd gained a lot of weight, sitting there eating like junk food, staying at the slot like all hours, like cheap food because I was so broke. I was just eating the cheapest foods, which is usually high in carbs and not good for you. So I'd
Right.
been diagnosed with diabetes. I'd also been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis from all the stress that I had caused myself. My stomach was just ate up with like ulcers and things like that. So
Wow.
it's like a lot of people don't realize that it is the stress that we cause ourselves with the gambling, like it is so hard on our bodies. I started kind of addressing my health issues, trying to lose the weight, to get my diabetes in check, to do the stuff to help my stomach, all these things. Like I said, I was kind of addressing all these different things, but I was never addressing the gambling. It wasn't
Right.
until 2020, the big C word, where everything shut down. In Oklahoma, we probably shut down the least amount of time because we're an oil and gas state. I think that they were probably starting to like that casino revenue. Like we shut down for maybe a month, maybe 30 days. Like that was the longest Oklahoma shut down. Other things might have been shut down longer, but I still had to go to work every day. I never got time off work for the C word. During that time when it was shut down, like there was no options for me. And that was the best I'd felt in so long. Like
Hmm.
I didn't have the choice to go. Money kind of started coming back, was able to kind of get ahead on some things or at least get caught up. And I just felt so good. There was no stress, there was no juggling to try and work it out. And I just remember thinking, okay, all right, this maybe I just need to cut back on this. This feels really nice. How long do you think I lasted?
I don't even want to render a guess, but I'm going to go far less than a year.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
I lasted 2 weeks after they opened up.
Wow.
And I
Oh,
was back in it just as heavy as ever. And so that continued on until the end of 2020. It was like really the end of the year. And I'd
okay.
had a really bad binge and I was just beside myself. It was right before Christmas. I'd spent all like bonus money and everything that I should have been buying gifts with. I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay the house payment and all these things the following
Right.
month. And I was just really stressed out. And I was watching TV. It was like after midnight by the time I got home. And I was watching TV and a show came on about food addiction. And this is really pivotal for me because remember, I said I didn't really know anything about addiction. And so
Yeah.
this show came on about food addiction. And this woman was talking about how she felt with the anticipation of the food she ordered. Like she was excited. She couldn't
Mhm.
wait. Like she was hungry, like whatever she said, just couldn't wait. And then how she felt eating the food, like just
Okay.
high, euphoric, like, oh, this is the best feeling ever. And then how she felt after she ate the food, the self loathing, the why am I doing this to myself? I'm killing myself. And when I say that, it wasn't like a hamburger and fries, right? We all feel guilty about eating a greasy hamburger and fries. It was 6 hamburgers, 6 fries, washed it down with like 4 shakes. Like, I mean, this is a real food addiction. But I really connected with every emotion she was feeling. The
Right.
anticipation, right? Oh, how I felt just thinking maybe I'll get lucky at the casino. Why I was there, just the escapism, how good it felt. Even if towards the end, like I didn't necessarily feel those same emotions, but it's definitely connected with me. And then the self-loathing. That's the part that I think held on to the most was like every time I left the casino, I was like, why am I doing this to my life? Like now I've got
Right.
to figure out how I'm going to take care of this and figure out how I'm going to take care of this and figure out what I'm going to say to him about this, and all these things. It was just like I was feeling so bad about myself and like everything she said I just connected with. And it was like, "Oh my gosh, ding ding ding. I'm struggling
Hmm.
with an addiction. I need to
Aha
try and
moment.
stop." Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was like,
Yeah.
"Wow." But I
Hmm.
still didn't like research it or really understand it or even know that recovery was an option.
Hmm.
Because they didn't talk about recovery in this episode.
Oh,
They were
okay.
just showing her story. And so I said, well, I'm going to not gamble. Like, I remember how good it felt not gambling earlier in the year. I'm going to not gamble. And I lasted 60 days, just white knuckling it. Like, I'm not going to gamble. And then I got in a fight with my ex, husband at the time, ex now. And it just sent me straight to the casino because I
Mhm.
didn't do anything in that 60 days to help me learn how to process emotions. And my emotional intelligence was really low because
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
hadn't done any work, right? Just avoidance. Like that was it, just
Yeah.
avoidance. That started a week long binge at the casino. And I won the most money I'd ever won
Wow.
gambling in that week. And I gambled every penny of it back. I had already been feeling, like I said, since about 2018, I'd had on and off feelings of not being here anymore. And
Mhm.
I think towards the end of 2020 and the beginning of 21, they were just more constant than they'd ever
Okay.
been. Like chaos, like just feeling like I'd be better off not here, even kind of like how would I do it, kind of those types of things. And I don't want to trigger anybody, so I'm just keeping it pretty. The last day that I bet, the last few days that I was betting, it felt so real to me that it scared me. Like I felt so close to just not being here that I really got scared in that night that I placed my last bet. It was actually like just after midnight on the 6th. I scared myself. I really scared myself. And, I went to pick up my phone knowing that I was going to have a lot of like missed messages and things like that. And I saw a picture of my mom and my sisters that was on my phone from my sister's wedding. And I just remember thinking in that moment, like, I can't do this to them. Like, I don't want to miss out on what's going on in their life. And I'd missed so
Yeah.
much of life in general. And I think it was just that realization and that flip of the switch of like, I don't want to die. I don't want to lose
Right.
my life to this. Like, I actually want to live. I want to live my life. I don't want to
Wow.
just be surviving it. And I think it was
Yeah.
in that moment that I just realized that I wanted the addiction to die. I
Mhm.
didn't want to die. And so for me, it was just like, what do I do now? Like, I've got to fight for my life or I won't be here. It was that scary for me. It was that real for me.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I went to my mom the next day and just kind of let her into it. And we made a plan. She knew somebody who'd gone to GA and she said, give them a call. I did. It wasn't the best experience. I got a bored kid on the line who said somebody will text you some meeting times. And they did later on that day. Um, I don't know what I was expecting. Like, I don't know if I wanted them to be like, yay, you finally came to the other side. But, I ended up going to a meeting that following Saturday and I started therapy the following week. And that was kind of the start of that.
Wow. What did you say total was a how many year journey total
About
from
15. From the start of
top?
it to the end of it is about 15.
Okay. So here you are now 15 years later, right? After having struggled with all of this. And by the way, what you just described there at the end, the hair on my arms are standing up because there's so much familiarity. Story's totally different, but so much familiarity in what you just said, in that we reach a point where it's like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know where else to go. Why am I even still here? Those kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
And for you to come to that resolve to say, no, right? This is not how I want to go about it. That can be not only an eye-opening moment, right? Or one of those transformative moments, but it also opens the door to bring in what can be there for you to help you move forward and recover. So I guess the question is, once you made that decision and you stepped into what I describe in my own story as get busy living or get busy dying, right? And I chose to get busy living. The opportunities for recovery started to come to me. Did you experience something similar, or was it a slow process? Did it start to move fairly quickly once you stepped into it? How did that go for you?
I mean, I feel like it moved pretty quickly as far as, I got it. I went to a GA meeting the following Saturday. So this all went down on like a weekend. So the following
Okay.
week, I went to my first GA meeting, which was a room full of men. And, I
Not
kind of
surprising.
felt, I felt, of course, a little awkward, but
Right.
they were great. They were kind. They had several years of recovery on them, and this is pretty fresh after the C word, and so these meetings were just starting to kind of get back together and starting to kind of reform again, and so there wasn't a lot of people in these meetings, but
Okay.
they were kind and to me other people who had struggled with it and kind of were able to pull themselves out, it was encouraging, so that was really great. And then starting therapy with somebody that wasn't gambling specific but just addiction specific, plus she was in recovery herself, So that was really, really helpful. And I just started kind of doing that. And but even in those early days, like I knew that what I was doing, even with the GA meeting and the therapy, wasn't going to be enough for me. I
Right.
needed more connection. Like once a week therapy was great, but that was 1 hour a week. The GA meeting was great, but it was a room full of men and it was 45 minutes start to finish. And I was driving
Right.
30 minutes each way to get there. So those were pivotal things, but I needed to know how I was going to get through the rest of my day. And so I started to kind of research what that looked like. Like, where are there other options? What books could I read? Like, all this kind of self help kind of stuff. And I started Googling and exploring. And the one thing that's when I found podcasts. I found Brian Hatch's podcast and
Mhm.
Jamie Salzberg's podcast. And so I started listening to those podcasts um, really early on. And it was really pivotal for me. But kind of the theme that I was experiencing was I'm not finding a lot of women in this space. Their podcast didn't, they would have a few women on. I remember when I came across Hatch's Gambling Got the Girls, like with
Mhm.
Danielle and Tiffany. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. But there were only a handful of episodes.
Yeah.
But
And
I didn't really find that until later on because it took me a while to get through his massive collection of episodes.
And
Yeah,
just a second, for those of you who aren't aware, the two podcasts she's referring to, first of all, Brian's is All In the Addicted Gamblers podcast, and Jamie's is the After Gambling podcast. Both of them very, very good podcasts where you can. And Brian has so many guests; it's not even, what does he have, 300 to 400 episodes out there right now? It's
yeah.
amazing, and interviews a whole array of different types of people, to include, by the way, the Sunday therapy group sessions that we went through for a while. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just wanted to kind of throw that in.
No, and I appreciate you that you did because they're my friends. So I just talk to them by name. Like even if I was referring to you to somebody, like I wouldn't be like Fall In podcast. I'd just be like, Dave Yeager and his podcast. Yeah, I kind of started listening to those episodes and I was loving them. I love the meeting episodes that you just mentioned, and it was made my day when I actually got invited to do some of
Mhm.
those meeting episodes because they were really impactful. That was the first time I think I'd heard another woman that they had brought on. I'd heard, therapists and people who work in the space. And it just gave me this really good understanding of, hey, there is a space for people who have struggled with gambling. You're not alone. This is a big issue that a lot of people are impacted with. And there are resources and there is help and there is hope. And that was really great for me. But I still was like, I want to hear other women who've overcome and navigated this because my life was kind of falling apart. You know, I was in
Yeah.
recovery now. I was going to therapy, but my marriage was falling apart because it wasn't healthy to begin with. And I'm trying to address all these things. And it was really hard. And he wasn't wanting to address his issues. And so it just added a lot of conflict and insecurity. And like I was going into my GA meetings just bawling. And they were just like, these guys didn't know what to do with me. They were like, there. It's
Yeah.
going to be okay. And I just knew that I needed more. And so I started looking at social media and I still just wasn't finding women doing this. So I
Mhm.
started posting my own like vlogs and things about my own journey, like getting through so many paychecks without gambling. I would post my keychains, that I would get from GA for the mile
Okay.
markers. And I would just be like, and people were responding to that. And then finally, a mutual friend of ours, Tara, who does the Ambitious Addicts podcast after the 12
Mhm.
steps, she reached out to me and she was like, hey, do you want to come on my podcast and share your story? She's like, gambling is part of my story as well. And I was like, oh my goodness, yes, I love podcasts. This is great. Did her podcast. I was like 60 days in doing her
Okay.
podcast. And I loved the whole process of it. I fell in love
Mhm.
with podcasting in that moment. You can give Tara a big O thanks when you see her for the Broke Girl Society podcast because she really put that bug in me and she was very helpful for me getting it started. And
Mhm.
that kind of started the next phase of the journey.
Wow.
Well, so from there, you now we're talking about you've been to some meetings, you saw what that was all about, you started to experience podcasts, and now you've made the decision that how does an introvert start a podcast?
It's actually really easy because you're not dealing with a crowd of people. You're one
Gotcha.
on one. And that to me
Uh-huh.
is so much easier. Like, it's crazy to me now to think that I go into rooms and speak in front of hundreds of people
Which
about
I've
my
seen, by the way. An amazing, amazing, amazing job of it too, which also baffles me.
you
Not that you're not amazing, but how an introvert does what you do because you're very good at it. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
it's challenging. And I remember, I think we're getting off track. So let me finish this and then we'll talk about these a couple of other things I wanted to
Okay.
share.
Okay.
But Tara was really helpful in like saying, "Hey, do this software and this thing," and so that was great. And
Mm.
then I thought, to me, that just I'm not a big social media person. I even hated when I was doing it there, but I just wanted to get my story out in case it would help somebody else.
Sure.
Because, like I said, I knew I wasn't alone in this, even though I felt alone when I was struggling with it. I just remember seeing people on, women on either side of me, the same women. So I knew I wasn't alone in this.
Right.
Um, and so, like, but still, the social media was really hard for me. I'm just not, even now, you don't see a lot of social media for me because I don't like it. So the podcasting is really nice because it's just like you and me having this conversation, even though we've been friends for what, 3, 4 years now.
Yep.
Um, and we see each other a lot. It's like, still, this feels really comfortable for me. I'm in my own space and I've got my drinks and, I've got, um, just my stuff surrounding me. And I love having conversations with other people about their story, whether it's gambling addiction or some other thing that they've been through. Like, there is
Right.
nothing more impactful, I think, than our stories. And
Mhm.
so I just fell in love with the storytelling aspect of podcasting, and I started to kind of figure out how to do it. Like, I don't have a technical background at all. I'm 40, I'll be 47 next month. And so it's like, I'm a Gen Xer. Like, this stuff didn't come natural to me.
Amen.
Yeah. And so it was like just a lot of trial and error. But as I was thinking about what am I going to name this podcast, it was like, golly. So I looked at my journaling because my therapist had me doing a lot of journaling so that we could come in and talk about it. And I just kept seeing the word broke so
Mhm.
much, and I was just like, broke financially. And it's kind of a play on the word gambling addiction, broke, but it broke me in so many other ways, right? It
Yeah.
broke me financially, spiritually, physically, just kind of what I said, emotionally. And that just kind of stuck with me. And the Broke Girl Society came out of it. And I started recording the podcast. And I remember I had the hardest time at the beginning getting anybody to come on because everyone's like, no, they were scared. They were scared. They
Yeah.
didn't know what that was going to look like. If they were part of a GA program, it was kind of frowned upon. So there were a lot of struggles in the early days trying to get people to come on. Whereas now I've got a pretty big queue of people to come
Right.
on. Like, I think by doing it, people felt really comfortable. They saw how impactful it was to hear somebody else's story and they wanted to share theirs in the hopes that it would impact somebody else. And so it ended up trickling into this big thing. And then I thought, well, why don't I just create a community that's kind of along with the podcast, but a community for women, a safe space where we can come in and we can talk about the things that we're struggling with, in not only in recovery but our life, because they have to
Right.
be one and the same. And so, I wanted people to be able to talk about the mom guilt, dating in recovery, hormones, and how hormones impact our recovery, because these aren't things you can't talk about in a room full of men. I don't think GA
No.
makes space for women's hormones, but it's a real big catalyst sometimes
Yeah.
into why women gamble. And it's like, when you don't make space for these conversations, nobody's figuring it out. So it's like, we got to create space so that we can talk about it, compare notes, and say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So we did that. We're now over 3,000 women in the BGS.
Wow.
We host 3 meetings a week,
Okay.
Sundays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. We did have a Thursday meeting, but we've now moved to a Wednesday meeting. So they kind of change around, so always check in. But we do 3 meetings a week, and a lot of great support happens.
So these meetings are first and foremost, I'm guessing virtual. They're online meetings, right? And
Yes.
then, with due respect to the 12-step programs and some of the organized programs that are out there, they have their place. I go to a 12-step meeting every single week, right? but there are multiple paths to recovery. And you brought up such a good point in that, you know, for women, I can't sit in a GA room and understand when you talk about the effect of hormones on a gambling addiction because I don't experience it the same way. So to be able to talk about that among a group of people who need that conversation, right? And need that outlet and can say it in front of people where they feel comfortable saying it first and foremost. And number two, people who get it, right? People who understand it. And I understand that because I went through a veterans gambling addiction program. And the minute I sat in that room, I felt home, right? Because there were people who could understand the language I was speaking. Not that it's that intensely different, but there are subtle differences. So I can imagine the feeling is the same that a woman steps into a room full of women and the topics that are brought up are it's a much more comfortable space to be able to talk about it freely, which is what we need to do in order to be able to connect and really recover.
Absolutely. I think the power of connection through shared experiences. You know, like
Mhm.
you and I, when you look at our podcasts, they're very niche podcasts, right? You
Yeah.
focus on people who have military experiences or kind of that area, and I focus on women, right? Even though we're both advocates for anybody impacted by gambling harm. But yeah, I think that those shared experiences, you know, going through a divorce, navigating recovery, you know, mom guilt is such a big thing I'm seeing.
Right.
Postpartum depression is a thing that I'm starting to see a lot more. I get often
Mhm.
get asked by media, like, what kind of trends are you seeing in the recovery space? And I'm like, well, that's a very clinical question that I am not a clinical person. But, you know, if I would say anything, I'm seeing younger women coming in
Yeah.
who are struggling with online gambling. They're up all weird hours because they've got new babies. They're dealing with postpartum depression. They're feeling alone. They're exhausted, and gambling is a good outlet for them in those late night moments, right? Where they can't do
Right.
anything else. So that's kind of something I've been seeing quite a bit is younger women who are impacted by this. And it's like they can come in and say, man, my baby kept me up all night. I'm tired. I struggled. I logged in just to kind of get some relief while they were feeding. And, you know, there's going to be so many women who've been through motherhood who know how challenging that time
Right.
is, you
Right.
know, and they can relate to that shared experience and they can say, hey, this was helpful for me during that time. And it kind of gives them some other ideas to focus on, you know, even in the space of like women who don't have children, kind of
Right.
like this is kind of somewhere that I lean into, right? That I wasn't able to have children. I don't have my own children. I have fur babies. So good. A dog and two cats. There's still a lot of like stigma and shame around that of a
Mhm.
woman who doesn't have children. Like, what's wrong with her? What, you know, especially if it's by choice or by life. And
Right.
so I'm really surprised to see how many women who don't have children in this space and like giving us kind of shared experiences of, you know, was this a personal decision or was
Sure.
it circumstances that got us there? You know, those types of things, having those heavier conversations and knowing that somebody's going to understand the gambling aspect of it, but also the life aspect of it. And being able to merge those two things in that shared experience, the same with you, I'm sure, when it comes to the military experiences and the gambling, right? Being able to
Mhm.
say, hey, I know like I went through this kind of experience and trauma and you know, the gambling made this feel better or made that feel better. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
when you talk with somebody who's not like me to go to a man who I don't want to give discredit to men out there. But in the majority, if I go to a man who has never gambled, like for instance, my ex-husband, when I told him that I was struggling with gambling, because I worked with this therapist 2 months before I could build up the nerve to tell him. Like, this is why your card declined at this particular
Okay.
time, and this is why this and I just remember kind of laying it all out there and like, do you want to go through the finances? Do you, you know, do you want to do figure this out with me? And he was just like, no. Like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like,
Mm.
you don't have a gambling problem. You're just bad with money. And then when I said, do
Right.
you want to kind of take over the finances then? He was like, no, I don't want to do any of that. So it was like that lack of support that I had. He
Yeah.
didn't understand gambling addiction. He didn't want to understand gambling addiction. He just wanted it to be my problem to deal with whatever. So obviously, I wasn't going to be able to talk to him about that. And which is why he's an ex. I knew then that my marriage was over. I knew when I got
Right.
married I shouldn't have
Right.
gotten married, but I knew in that moment, like, no, this is hardcore it, and we ended up getting a divorce. At the same time, it's like having a safe space to be able to talk about those things. And one of the biggest things is if you've experienced trauma at the hands of a man, abusive relationships in whatever capacity, and they say, well, the only place for you to recover is in a room full of men, do you think that that's going to work? Probably not.
Yeah, I give that a very, very, very low likelihood of success
Yeah,
because of number one, stigma and willingness right off the bat. I know if the role was reversed, no way, not for me. Because
exactly.
and not because I think I'm going to be judged or criticized, but because I think that I'm going to walk in there and that group of women that I'm walking into are may not understand my perspective. So if we're a group of men and a woman walks in, there's a very good chance we're not going to understand the deeper feelings, the deeper meaning of what you're saying. There's so much value in, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. You may not have experienced the exact same thing, but I understand how you feel. And just the ability to get that from somebody can be so healing in that moment. So it's so powerful what you've done, and you've taken and you've created that environment where a woman can walk in and just feel like they have a better chance of taking the shackles off and just talking, right? Because they have a better chance of you hearing it and going, yeah, I get it. And that's just, to me, that's an amazing thing.
Yeah, and I think, to be able to provide that space
Yeah.
has been one of the just the biggest things I feel like I could have ever done in my life, is just to be able to create a space where women feel seen and heard. And I'm not saying that, I have mad respect for the 12 step programs that are out there. There's so many different ones, so many different pathways you can go, because they offer structure and support and a space. Because I feel like we can all connect on the gambling, right? Or we can all connect on the addiction side of it. It's just the
Right.
deeper levels that we need to address sometimes. We're not going to we're not going to always find in certain spaces. And so it's like, I
Right.
just feel like we should all have spaces that make us feel safe and like at home, whatever that needs to look like, whether
Yeah.
it's related to your background, your culture, those types of things. Like we all deserve a space where we feel comfortable.
I completely agree. And even though you might step into a room, a mixed room or a room full of men or whatever it is, and even though the judgment might not be there, because most of the time when I walk into a 12-step room, there's no judgment. I don't feel judgment from that room. But what I might feel is a lack of understanding of where I truly am,
Yep.
and that, I think that's kind of where you're going with that, is you want to fill that in with that, that I feel you,
Yep.
I feel where you are. And just to have somebody to understand that somebody is there, that somebody understands how I feel. Boy, what a difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It does make a big difference. And I think that that's
Yeah.
another thing that's just that community is going to, what keeps us engaged and keeps us coming back.
Right. Right. So you have the podcast, which now has been, how many years now have you had the podcast?
In July, July 1st, it'll be 4 years since I released the first episode.
That's amazing.
I know.
4 years, and you're still consistently cranking out episodes. You've got the group now, which is over 3,000 women strong and 3 meetings per week. What's next for Christina? What's next on the agenda? What's the next thing that you do, or do you just kind of strengthen the things that you have now?
I think just a continuation of the things that I'm doing.
Hmm.
I continue to be really active in the recovery space. I do a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of training. Hopefully, my book will be out by next spring. It's kind of, we're at the tail end of kind of figuring out how that's going to come out. I just hope to keep kind of pumping out projects. I've got a couple of different podcast projects that have been kind of in the works and kind of nearing to a place where we can get those out. And so I think I'll find myself always collaborating in different ways. I'll be taking over some episodes for Rob Minnick's One Day at a Time YouTube channel. I'm going to take over some of his episodes in July. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to have a 4-year anniversary episode for the Broke Girl Society, and
Awesome.
yeah, I'm just going to just keep doing what I'm doing and keep sharing my voice as long as people want to hear it, I guess.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. For people who might be interested and want to learn more about the Broke Girl Society and the things that you're doing, how do they find you?
They can just visit my website, brokegirlsociety.com. You can also reach out to me if you have a story you want to share, or just, you just want to tell somebody your story. I get a lot of emails where they just want to tell me their story. They don't necessarily aren't looking for a response or help. They just want to be able to write down their story and send it to somebody who understands, who can read it objectively and be like, oh, okay, I understand that. Like, I just have this mindset of no matter where this addiction has taken us, like, I hear so many stories of, how this disease has progressed. I understand because I saw how it hijacked my life and how I allowed it to. And so there's never any judgment. Like, so, I have read some really, really hard stories. I've had women on the podcast who have shared really, really hard stories. And, that's why we do the work that we do, so that people have spaces and places that they can do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So any final wrap them up thoughts that you might have as we kind of come to the end of this thing?
Well, I think for me, it's always like you're always surprised. Like, I'm coming on your podcast, which is military focused, but when you were on mine, which is women focused, right? I ended up getting several messages of people who are like, "I'm in the military. This really hit home for me, and I really appreciate it." So I think it's interesting to kind of be able to maybe reverse that, and maybe someone will be like, "Ah, I didn't know there was a person out there doing a podcast for women." So I just wanted to
Yeah.
share that because I thought that was really exciting when I got those messages.
And I hope so. I hope that if there are women out there who feel a little isolated because it seems like a men-driven recovery world, I hope they hear this and they find you and they reach out to you because, that's what we're here for, isn't it? We're here because we experience things that were harmful. And for me, I feel like my job is to pay that forward because I've been given the gift of recovery, right? So my job is to pay that forward, raise awareness around the fact that this really is a disease that you really can recover. You can be in recovery for it. And just telling our stories is what can help get us there because people can relate to that. So if you are out there and you are interested in hearing more about Christina and what Christina does and learning more, brokegirlsociety.com, please reach out. If you're in crisis, dial 988. If you're a veteran in crisis, dial 1. You can also email me directly, fallinpodcast@gmail.com. And you're welcome to check out my website, daveyeager-fallin.com. Christina, let me just wrap up by saying thank you so much. What an honor and a privilege to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing.